I first met Mary Faith during the fall of 2014 at her ranch in Lincoln, Montana. My good friend Jim Stein, who's here today, arranged the meeting along with her son Jeff Hoeffner and his wife Marie. The plan was to record a few of Mary Faith's stories. As Jim and I drove over the Continental Divide, he pointed out the location on Flesher Pass where Mary Faith had once slid her pickup off the road and down a cliff. As we dropped into Lincoln and crossed the Big Blackfoot River, Jim mentioned that Mary Faith had once lost her horses to the river when its banks filled with poison for an upstream mine. It was about the same time, he said, that her dad and stepmother had been in a gunfight up Alice Creek. Geez, I thought, who is this lady? When we arrived at the ranch, Mary Faith was nowhere to be found. Out on the front door was a note, "Gone riding, Deer Lodge." Jim laughed and said we might as well get comfortable because Mary Faith could be a while. Deer Lodge is 70 miles from Lincoln. A few minutes later, however, Mary Faith appeared across the meadow. She was driving a golf cart that looked like it had spent more time off-road than most ATVs. I looked at Jim and said, "I guess the note is old." At 82 years, her eyes were bright, and she moved on her feet like she was 35. Mary Faith led us inside the log ranch house where we sat at a handmade wooden kitchen table. The smell of coffee hung in the air. One of the biggest elk I'd ever seen also hung in the air. I asked Mary Faith about the animal, and she smiled and told a story about deep snow, a .284 Winchester, and a day in the backcountry that ended, well, just right. At that point, I pulled out my digital recorder and asked if she would be okay if I recorded her. She agreed, and for the next 2 hours, she talked about horses, family, and friends, in that order. Later, as I transcribed the interview, I began to realize just how incredible her stories were. As a historian of the American West, I've read diaries and accounts of women pioneers and homesteaders in Montana, but never an account of a woman outfitter. I tried to find references or histories on other women outfitters who worked in the Bob Marshall and Scapegoat wildernesses during the 1960s through the 1990s, but I couldn't find any. As far as I can tell, little has been written on the subject. That is, until now. A few weeks after conducting the oral history with Mary Faith, she called and wanted to know if I would be interested in helping her record a few more of her stories. We met at her son Jeff's ranch in Winston, Montana, where she handed me an old grocery bag full of faded and sunburned yellow legal paper. On the pages were handwritten stories, some dating back decades. They were Mary Faith's adventures, written with her own hand as she remembered them. They touched on her life as a young woman, growing up in Augusta, falling in love with horses, her time as a trick rider and a competitive rider at Montana State College, her second love after horses, Kenny Hoeffner, who she married, her life as a mother, an outfitter, a friend, and I might add, a crack shot. Over the following 6 months, I transcribed the stories. Every week or so, I'd get a package in the mail with a note that said, "I found a few more pages, sorry." I suggested to Mary Faith that we should put together a book, and she agreed. The spring of 2015, Mary Faith caught a cold she just couldn't shake and ended up in the hospital. Each time the doctors said she wouldn't make it out, she did. She went to rehab and escaped. It took 3 police cars and an ambulance to track her down. And when they found her, she argued, quote, "She was a citizen and had rights, goddammit." She made it clear she wasn't returning to rehab, and so during the fall of 2015, her children moved her back into the ranch house in Lincoln. She spent 2 months giving rides to visitors on the beat-up golf cart and tending to her horses. When she couldn't drive any longer or get out to see her horses, her family brought them to her. Outside her bedroom window, she watched the leaves turn and her favorite buckskin badger nibble yellow grass in the meadow. On her ranch, in the shadow of the wilderness, Mary Faith took her last breath. She lived and died on her own terms, a true pioneer woman. Over the next hour, I'd like to share a few of Mary Faith's adventures. I'll do my best to place her stories in context, but I plan on letting her do most of the talking. She wanted this statement on the first page of her memoir, so I'll begin with it here in case she's looking down on us. She wrote, quote, "I am not an authority on outfitting, wilderness, horse breaking, or even raising a family. but I have lived the life and rode the miles. This is my story. At an early age, Mary Faith discovered riding, and she was good at it. By the time she was 8 years old, she was helping her dad herd cattle at the Augusta Ranch. In high school, she competed as a trick rider and barrel racer. Her trick pony, Bucko, had a glass eye, which apparently was a good thing, because Mary Faith came in first at the Montana High School Rodeo in 1950. She was the oldest of 5, 2 sisters, Nancy and Joanne, and 2 brothers, Stephen and Kenny. And here's a picture of the family with Mary Faith in the middle. She said, Mary Faith took credit for naming her brother Stephen. She wrote, "I wanted to name my brother Barry Stephen, but we decided that the initials BS weren't any good. So he became Stephen Barry." Mary Faith often rode with Stephen and her other siblings. The big wide open of the Montana plains near Augusta was her arena, and the rugged peaks of the Rocky Mountain front, her proving grounds. Mary Faith's abilities as a rider eventually led her to the rodeo team at Montana State College, where she competed for a year in barrel racing and was judged judged by Spike Van Cleve, earning the title of Rodeo Queen. However, Bozeman wasn't home, and most importantly, Bozeman didn't have Kenny Hoeffner, a handsome young man who Mary Faith had met while attending school in Augusta. So here's Spike Van Cleve here, Mary Faith riding here. Which one's Mary Faith? Far left. Yeah. I think Mary Faith saw a little bit of herself in Kenny. He was determined, worked hard, and wasn't afraid to do things on his own terms. Kenny joined the Air Force after high school and was stationed in Denver, Colorado. Mary Faith went with him, and in 1952, while he was training as a B-29 gunner, they were married. Soon after the wedding, Kenny was deployed to Okinawa to fly in the Korean War. Mary Faith was pregnant with her first of 4 daughters and moved back home, where her family took good care of her. Jackie was the first to meet Aunt Ada, or Banjo, as they called her. She was a staunch Democrat and Catholic who was very proud to have shook the hand of John F. Kennedy. Ada and Mary Faith were good friends and gardened together while Kenny was away. After a tour in Korea, Kenny was reassigned to Mountain Home, Idaho, where they lived in a 27-foot trailer near the Air Force Base, with no bath or toilet. That's where their second daughter, Jerry, was born. Mary Faith wrote, "Idaho wasn't too bad, though. Good neighbors, all young and in the same boat. We were broke most of the time since servicemen's pay wasn't much. We played horseshoes together, good hunting and fishing. We liked Idaho, but wanted to get back to the ranch at Augusta. As soon as they could afford it, they moved back to Montana. They landed with Mary Faith's parents, where their third daughter, Judy, was born. Kenny began ranching with Mary Faith's father, L. Kenneth McLean, but the two had different ideas for the ranch. So Mary Faith and Kenny started looking for a place to call their own. On Father's Day, 1955, they went to Lincoln, Montana for a picnic with Banjo, Aunt Mary, and Uncle Clarence at their 160-acre property. Mary Faith wrote, "Kenny and I immediately fell in love with it. So in 1959, we bought our little dream ranch from Aunt Mary and Uncle Clarence. We moved to Lincoln with our 3 little girls, Jackie, Jerry, and Judy, to a house with a sod roof and a wood cook stove, no bathroom, just a path to the outhouse. It was simple, but we were happy." The Lincoln winters were long and cold, and ranching was harder than either of them expected. Mary Faith wrote, "We wanted a ranch, but oh, the cold and snow. We were in the cattle business, but little did we know about the long winters in Lincoln. Come spring, we were calving a bunch of cows. We lost calves to pine needle abortion. Lots of sick calves in the house. Don't think we ever got over losing the calves." Despite the difficulties, Mary Faith and Kenny were happy. They were living on their own terms, surrounded by mountains and beautiful scenery. But the ranch wasn't enough to support their growing family, and the uncertainties wore on Mary Faith. She wrote, I remember Jackie was in first grade and we drove her to school. There was no school bus. I remember her saying, "Can't I have a candy bar for lunch?" She probably had pancakes or sandwiches in her pack. I remember saying, "Jackie, we were about to lose the ranch. No candy bars." Money was tight, and so Mary Faith and Kenny began looking for ways to supplement their income. Kenny took a side job driving a D6 Cat, skidding logs for the county, and Mary Faith worked to make the ranch more efficient. She became pregnant and had their fourth daughter, Penny Jo, but that didn't slow her down. She wrote, "I rode and drove the truck when we moved cows to summer pasture. I raked hay with a baby on my lap, round and round the hayfield." In the early 1960s, Mary Faith's father, Kenneth McLean, acquired an outfitter's license from the Forest Service to guide hunting and fishing trips in the mountains near Lincoln, and invited Kenny, Mary Faith's husband, to work as a hunting guide during the fall. It was at that point, through Kenny, that Mary Faith got a taste of what outfitting was all about, and she liked it. In 1961, she became pregnant with their fifth and final child, a boy they named Jeff. She went into labor November 7th, 1961, and had a friend drive her to the hospital in Helena because Kenny was out somewhere skidding logs. She remembered that date specifically. She wasn't much for dates, but that one was in bold and underlined. She wrote, "I remember that day well because the doctor came to my room at St. Pete's Hospital to tell me that my husband was on the next floor down with broken ribs and bruises from rolling a D6 Cat off Stemple Pass. Wow, what to do? A baby boy and 4 little girls. Luckily, Dad came to the hospital and took Kenny, me, and baby Jeff to the ranch and took care of us and fed the livestock. Neighbors came every evening at 5 p.m. with a dish for supper. What wonderful neighbors. We were grateful. What a wonderful dad." Mary Faith's father decided to sell his outfitter's permit in 1963, and Kenny and Mary Faith jumped on the opportunity to become outfitters themselves. Her father's brand was K Lazy 3, so they named the business K Lazy 3 Outfitters and Guides. Kenny and Mary Faith worked with the Forest Service to acquire another camp further into the backcountry, which they named Camp Creek. She recalled, "Camp Creek was true wilderness. There was no trail or camp. So that first year we busied ourselves, building a trail with the help from neighbors and friends. We began with a small crew consisting of me, Kenny, and the kids. The Glaze family went up to camp with us several times and helped build trail 2 or 3 miles up a creek. The trail crossed the creek back and forth. Dave Harrington and Les Nader, who later became guides for us, helped build corrals and tent frames. No chainsaws in the wilderness. Everything was done by hand." Mary Faith and Kenny started outfitting officially on their own in 1964, the same year Congress passed the Wilderness Act. Mary Faith wrote that first season they had 6 horses and 6 paying hunters, 1 for each horse. It wasn't even enough to cover their expenses. "Not much income for a family of 7, she wrote. That winter, Mary Faith created brochures, and she and Kenny began building up the clientele any way they could. She wrote, "My girls worked as waitresses at Lambkin's Cafe in Lincoln to earn money for school clothes and other stuff. One morning, a couple guys came in for breakfast. They were hunters looking for a place to hunt. Jackie said, 'Hey, my dad's an outfitter. Would you like to hunt in the backcountry?' Before you knew it, they were on the trail with Jerry, headed for our camp. They were from New York and hunted with us for many years. They would always say it's a sad day when leaving camp." As the business grew, Mary Faith and Kenny found their stride. They led summer pack trips to the Chinese Wall and fishing trips to different forks of the Sun River. In the fall, they guided elk and deer hunters who came from all over the U.S. to experience a Montana backcountry hunt. As business increased, they hired guides to help. Some were friends, former clients, or men who just showed up at their house in Lincoln looking for work. One of Mary Faith's favorite guides was Dave Harrington. Dave had an interesting pastime. He roped grizzly bears. Mary Faith wrote, "Dave was tough and liked to fight. He did well in high school rodeo, but kind of got out of hand. He always ended up back at our place. He was one heck of a guide and a packer. Married 3 times. Roped grizzly bears up on a ranch in Browning. He always sent a Christmas card, a cowboy card, and a note. Or he would call. He would call and say, 'Mary Faith, I roped another one.' 'Another what?' I would say. 'Another grizz.' Some folks didn't believe it, but if you knew Dave, you would believe it. He would do it. I knew him. Dave is gone now, passed away in 2013. Miss him. He was one of a kind." The one-of-a-kind description that Mary Faith often gave to her guides and friends also applied to herself. She could lead a pack string, roast a turkey, and guide clients up a mountain in the same day. She was at home in the backcountry, especially on one of her favorite horses, Macho or Rooster. Her horsemanship was never in question. Her years as a trick rider and competitive barrel racer had prepared her for just about anything a horse or mule could pull, and she knew the flora and fauna of the high country well. She was hired by John and Frank Craighead, the famous grizzly bear researchers, to outfit them and their students in the Scapegoat wilderness. She could find a bear if she wanted to, and did on more than one occasion. One summer trip, a group of fishermen from California told Mary Faith they wanted to see a bear. They had been sipping on whiskey and thought it would be fun. Mary Faith grinned and said, "Okay, let's find a bear." She led the group on horseback into the heart of Scotty Creek, an upper ridge where they ran into two blonde bears. Startled and nervous, the Californians whispered, "What do we do?" Mary Faith laughed and said, "Just keep going." It was the first time they had seen a real-life version of their state flag. In the outfitting business, the work is never done. In addition to guiding, Mary Faith managed camp. When clients were napping after a long day of riding, she was preparing meals and packing lunches for the next day. Her camp was intentional, from the layout of the kitchen to the direction of the door flaps. She wrote, "Our camp generally consisted of a large 16 by 24 tent with doors and flaps on each end and a dirt floor, which I swept clean of dust with a large branch. I poured dish rinse water on the floor and it became hard by fall. We had a large table covered with red Naugahyde tablecloth. With my red Naugahyde tablecloth, sometimes I'd put wildflowers in tin cans on the table. We used a large wood barrel stove with a flat top for cooking. One luxury we did have was a 30-inch propane stove to bake and cook on. Cupboards we made of plywood and set up for dishes and silverware. 2 plywood cupboards were for bread and groceries. Work table along the wall with shelves beneath. An old cupboard behind the stove with the cast iron grills, skillets, pans, and dish pans. We also had a table for a washstand. And we usually put up a fly outside for extra rain cover. Outside we had lots of stumps with backs to be used as extra chairs. I always slept in the northwest corner of the cook tent on my cot with my dog Tango underneath. We put up a tarp between my bedroom and the kitchen table. I was lucky. Usually Kenny, Jeff, or one of the guides lit the big barrel stove and put on coffee on cold mornings. It was nice and warm in the cook tent. I lived in my sleeping bag from May till November. There's another view of the inside of her cooking tent. There's some pretty good history right here. One, the outfit. You just don't see that anymore. And I don't remember the last time I seen a radio with an antenna like that. So I guess that's what you have to do if you want to get a signal in the backcountry. Look at these rolls. They're making me hungry right now. And then finally, you can see that Morton Salt hasn't changed their logo. Here you can see some of there's the red Naugahyde tablecloth. You can see the cupboards, the stove, the layout of her kitchen, and of course, the dirt floor that is hard by now from the dish soap poured on it day after day after day. At night, Kenny would build a giant campfire and clients would gather around. With a little whiskey on board sometimes and with the flames dancing in his eyes, he'd recite Elmer and the Bear. Mary Faith wrote, "My husband Kenny had a Phil Harris song that was great for kids. He couldn't carry a tune, but repeated Elmer and the Bear every trip. It went something like this. Now Elmer Jones arose at dawn, he put his hunting breeches on and looked up at his shotgun on the wall. He made his mind up then and there to bag himself a mess of bear." And it goes on, but I'll stop there. More campfire songs and an encore performance of the cremation of Sam McGee by guide Leon Michaels is often how evenings unfolded. But before everyone headed to bed, they would have a moment of reflection. Mary Faith would gather everyone around and say, "Look up." All of us who have spent a night with clear skies in the backcountry understand why she did this. It's a powerful moment. To place yourself in perspective is something we don't often do. I think Mary Faith understood that many of the people who came to K-Lazy 3 Outfitters for an adventure needed that perspective. The busyness of life, of the city, the stress, the petty things we often argue about at work or at home don't seem that important when staring into the Milky Way in the middle of 1.5 million acres of wilderness. But you better get to bed and up early, because breakfast was early, and you didn't want to miss Mary Faith's biscuits and gravy. She became an expert chef, cooking with few of the conveniences we all enjoy. No motors, no wheels, no chainsaws, no electricity in the wilderness. If you did it by hand. 3-course meals were prepared daily. Mary Faith took pride in the way she and Kenny took care of clients, and the clients loved it. She wrote, "We fed our guests the usual menu of spaghetti, lasagna, pork chops, or potatoes, onions, sauerkraut, and mushroom soup, and sometimes cowboy scalloped potatoes. We had a roasted turkey every hunt, as well as roast beef or pork. Juicy rib steak on every hunt on the last night. No freeze-dried food in our camp. We fed them well." Look at the size of that. I mean, that's what, 3 inches? You're not going hungry in Mary Faith's camp. During the fall hunting season, Mary Faith didn't guide much. She managed camp full-time. When the hired guides were out chasing elk and deer with clients, Mary Faith would find time to get out on her own. She wrote that she loved putting down new tracks on the trail where the only sound you can hear is of horse shoes striking the rock and the creaking of leather. She loved to hunt, but not for the sake of the kill. Hunting meant horses and mountains and new country, and for Mary Faith, there was nothing better than riding a good horse in new country. On one outfitting trip, she decided to do a little exploring. She wrote, quote, "I got myself into some trouble on one trip. I had supper ready, already baked a cake, and I had a chicken out to roast. So I took my new horse Fly up Scotty Creek hunting. It was a beautiful day, but cold, elk tracks everywhere. I was sitting there on top of Fly thinking about who knows what when Fly grazed between 2 trees. There was room for him, but not me in my saddle. He brushed me off backwards and I fell. I felt my knee snap as I hit the ground. Oh boy, here I am on top of Scotty Creek with a broken leg. It was below zero, and I was lying in 12 inches of snow. I sat there trying to decide what to do. Everyone was out hunting, Kenny out packing an elk to Lincoln. No one would be coming home until dark. Decided I best stay there. Fly went off grazing. I found Kenny's cigarette lighter in my pocket, along with my hunting license and a Kleenex. I reached for some pine needles and branches. I slid over next to a big log and got a fire started. Unzipped my chaps and slid them under me. There I sat. I fell about 10:30 a.m. I knew the hunters were way over on Blondie Creek, where Kenny had just packed an elk off. While he was packing the elk, he saw a big grizzly watching him, but luckily it didn't bother him. I hoped it wouldn't bother me either. I sat in the snow, looking at my watch, 1 p.m. Everyone was likely on Blondie Creek eating lunch, 2 p.m. Hunters and guides hunting, 4 p.m. Wish someone would find me. Then between 5 and 6, I heard a shot over by Sourdough. Yep, they shot an elk, I thought. I was getting tired of keeping the fire going and could only reach so far for branches. The temperature continued to fall. It was so cold. If I sat still, my leg didn't hurt, but it was getting to be a long day. Finally, I heard a voice say, "Mary Faith, what are you doing up here?" Thank God, it was Lenny Orr. He said, "Come on, get on this horse behind me." I said, "I can't. I think I broke my leg." By that time, it was 7 p.m. and dark. Lenny fired 3 shots, and Jeff answered with 3 more. Lenny took off for camp. He sent Jeff and 3 hunters up Scotty Creek and then headed out for the phone at the Forest Service station 13 miles away. Jeff and the hunters from Princeton, Iowa brought coffee, sandwiches, and of course, pills. It was 10 a.m. the next morning after spending a night on top of the mountains when a helicopter flew over us, but didn't find me because I was on the mountain. Jeff and the hunters built 3 fires to keep warm. They put green branches on for smoke for the helicopters to see. It's a long story, but they finally landed 1 ski on the mountain and set down long enough to toss me in. I finally made it to Great Falls, where Kenny and Judy waited at the hospital. I had a fractured knee and was out of hunting camp for the season. Kenny had to cook and hated it. There's Mary Faith recovering. To use a cowboy phrase, Mary Faith was double tough. During her 30-plus years outfitting, she suffered a concussion, a broken right leg, a broken left leg, and a broken kneecap. But I want to add she was double tough in more than one way. She wasn't just an outfitter. She raised a family during this time, attended the Catholic Church in Lincoln. She was a member of the PTA and gave back to the community. When the bucking chutes at the Lincoln and Helmville arenas needed painting, she painted them white. She helped friends who were experiencing tough times because she knew they would be there for her if she needed. She was always doing something. To quote her daughter Judy, "Mom told me that you have to keep moving or you'll die." She kept moving. That philosophy helped Mary Faith navigate what she called the tough times in her life. During the winter and spring of 1975-76, the tailing ponds at the Mike Horse Mine at the headwaters of the Big Blackfoot River failed. Poison filled the banks of the river. All their horses and mules were wintered at the Lincoln Ranch, which bordered the river. She wrote, "We had a big snowstorm and thought the horses would come home. After a couple days, we went to look for them. Kenny and Judy found 13 head dead in the river. Sad, sad day for the family. Some of the girls' favorite horses died. All the toxins washed down the river where the horses were drinking. We had the state vet check them, and he said they died of cyanide poisoning. Their throats were burned through." When the Hoeffner's friends in Lincoln found out what happened, they threw a benefit dance at the community hall to raise money for new stock, free lunch, and $5 to get in, with the proceeds going to the family. When their hunter friends from Texas found out, they sent checks in the mail. Mary Faith and Kenny were grateful for the outpouring of support, and they used the money to buy new horses and mules. But as Mary Faith said, those horses could never be replaced. That outfitting season was a challenge, working with all new livestock, but Mary Faith and Kenny made the most of it and came out on the other side on top with successful trips to the Chinese Wall, successful hunting at Meadow Creek Camp. They headed into the next season with things looking up. It was September 1977, a year after their horses had died, that Mary Faith received news that would change her life. She, Kenny, and guide Dan Quee were at their wilderness camp at Meadow Creek, getting ready for fall hunting. They were unloading supplies when 2 Forest Service employees rode into camp. One of them motioned to Kenny to meet him at the corrals. The men returned a few minutes later and said, "Mary Faith, you better sit down." She said, "What's the matter?" Kenny replied, "Well, your dad's been shot and killed." Mary Faith said, "Oh, poor Marion." The men looked at each other and said softly, "Well, she's gone too." What Mary Faith couldn't have known at the time is that while she was setting up camp at Meadow Creek, her father, Kenneth, and stepmother, Marion, were on the other side of the divide at Alice Creek in a gunfight for their lives. It all began several months earlier in Lincoln, Nebraska, where Andrew Sunday, 36 years old, James Wilson, 28, and Donna Mitchell, 22, committed a series of robberies. For whatever reason, they decided to run west, and perhaps because of the similar name, picked Lincoln, Montana as their destination. Their plan was to hide out in the mountains and live off the land, but their car broke down on Rogers Pass before they made it into town. On the other side of the road where the car broke down happened to be a cabin and tack shed owned by Mary Faith's father and stepmother. The trio hid their car and broke into the McLean's corrals and tack shed. They stole 3 horses, gear, and guns. They saddled up and spent the next 2 days riding along the Continental Divide Trail towards Alice Creek. 2 days later, on the morning of September 6th, Kenneth and Marion arrived at their property and discovered the theft. They tried to contact Mary Faith and Kenny, but they were already at camp. They notified a few friends in Lincoln, including the local game warden, Larry Davis, and then went looking for the horses themselves. They decided to check up Alice Creek, a beautiful canyon cut by a cold mountain stream. That afternoon, they reached the top of the trail where they spotted Sunday, Wilson, and Mitchell riding across a grassy meadow. According to Jim Wilson's court testimony, Kenneth parked his blue International pickup in the rider's path. He was armed with a .308 bolt-action rifle, and Mary and his wife carried a .38 revolver. Kenneth was the first to exit the pickup, hollering, "What the goddamn hell is going on? What kind of prank is this? Give us our horses or we will shoot you." Marion added, "You're goddamn right we will." At that point, Andrew Sunday, who was carrying a .30-30 rifle, jumped down from the stolen horse, raised his weapon and fired, hitting Kenneth in the leg. They didn't know it, but Sunday was an ex-Marine sharpshooter and mentally unstable. Kenneth and Marion fired back, missing. Sunday approached, knocked Kenneth to the ground, and fired another round at point-blank range. Wilson, who was carrying a shotgun, shot Marion in the face, killing her instantly. In only a few short minutes, both Kenneth and Marion were dead. The stolen horses had spooked during the gunfight, making off with the killer's supplies. With no way to continue on, they buried the guns in the meadow and stole what money the McLeans had on them, took the pickup back to Lincoln, where they played a round of pool at Lambkin's bar before stealing a different car and driving to Missoula. The following morning, a sheep herder, who had heard the shots a drainage away, found the bodies and alerted the sheriff. He said he saw Mr. McLean's shirt blowing in the wind above green grass. Volunteers and friends in Lincoln located the horses and identified the killers by their food stamp cards stuffed in the saddlebags. The McLeans were killed on a Tuesday, and on that Saturday, the trio were arrested by police in Pendleton, Oregon, as they tried to get money at a Western Union office. Both Wilson and Sunday were tried and convicted for the murders. Wilson was sentenced to 100 years with the chance of parole, and Sunday 240 years with no parole. Both were sent to the prison in Deer Lodge. Donna Mitchell was sentenced to 8 years at the Life Skills Center for Women in Billings, where she was educated and enjoyed the company of her daughter on weekends. She served only a little over a year before being granted parole. Friends and family of the McLeans couldn't believe she got off so easy. They gathered petitions with over 450 signatures, urging the parole board to reconsider. However, due to a misunderstanding about the date of the hearing, the letters arrived a week after the parole board had ruled. The McLeans and Hoeffners wrote to Montana Governor Thomas Judge seeking to postpone her release date, but to no avail. Mitchell was released in February 1979. Mary Faith wrote that during the trial it came out that Andrew Sunday was the real mastermind, and Jim Wilson, Donna Mitchell, and her 3-year-old daughter Shirley were more or less in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jim Wilson wrote the family a letter apologizing for what he did, but as Mary Faith said, letters don't bring people back. She attended all the parole board hearings for Wilson, and she wrote, "When he had been in for about 25 years, I was feeling lenient about things. Then I read the pathologist's report about the way he and Sunday killed my dad and stepmother. After reading how they executed them, I said, no way are they going to get out. You know, it was just by chance that they stopped right there. It was just by chance they decided to take horses over the mountains. Those were tough times." I think the murder of her father added a layer of complexity to Mary Faith. She had always been an optimist, someone who was able to find the positive in every situation. However, I think she struggled deeply to see anything positive about what happened. Like she said, it was just by chance that they stopped right there. As I read between the lines of her memoir, I think Mary Faith came to terms with what happened, but never got over it. And perhaps that's the lesson. We should never become dull to the senseless loss of life. In 2014, as I recorded this story with her, her eyes got a little foggy as she told me how much her father meant to her. At 82, she still missed him deeply. The original outfitting permit had belonged to Mary Faith's father, and his legacy lived on through the business and Mary Faith's tenacity. For the next 11 years, Mary Faith and Kenny grew the business. With the permission of the Forest Service, they expanded and created another camp on the East Fork of the North Fork of the Blackfoot River. They brought in clients from all over the country, including a prominent Washington, D.C. judge and his beautiful daughter, Marie. Marie caught the eye of Jeff Hoeffner, Mary Faith and Kenny's son, who was working as a guide at the time. The last night in camp, Judge Belson came to Mary Faith worried and said, "Hey, where's Jeff and Marie?" Nobody knew. The next morning, Mary Faith found a note on a brown paper bag saying, "I had to go out to dinner with Marie and her dad, promised to be back in camp early in the morning. Jeff didn't make it back the next morning and eventually married Marie." About it all, Mary Faith wrote, "What can I say? A very romantic pack trip with a wonderful ending." And Jeff and Marie are here today. They have 3 children and live in Winston, Montana. With the good times came the challenges, and the years 1988 and 89 tested Mary Faith's resolve. The summer of '88 was dry and lightning struck in Mineral Creek Basin, 10 miles from their hunting camp in the Scapegoat Wilderness. They had a group of 8 clients with them, and at night they watched as the red glow of the fire got closer and closer. Mary Faith wrote, "We knew with a little wind it might blow up, and on September 6th the winds came and the fire exploded from a few thousand acres to several 100,000. With ash and smoke falling from the sky, Mary Faith and Kenny rushed their guests to the trailhead at Indian Meadows and sent their friend and guide, Leon, back to camp to try to save what he could, but it was too late." She wrote, "Mineral Creek, along with our Meadow Creek camp, burned. Everything was lost. The Hoeffner's camp on the east fork of the north fork of the Blackfoot River was also burned. They lost a large cook tent, wrangler tent, 2 sleeping tents, hay for that hunting season, cooking utensils, and the corrals. Of that tough time," Mary Faith wrote, "it was a sad sight. Tent frames burned, Dutch oven cracked, dead fish in the streams, burning logs everywhere. It was just before hunting season. We were in a tight spot, hunters coming and no camp." Due to the situation, the Forest Service granted Kenny and Mary Faith a one-time exception to use chainsaws for a few days and airlifted in supplies for them with the Forest Service helicopter. Again, their friends came to their aid, helping build new corrals, clear trails, and set up camp. Mary Faith wrote, "New tents, new stoves, new gear, and we did it all in a week. We went to work, we got her done." They ended the season on a high note, with successful hunts and new camps built at Meadow Creek and East Fork. That winter, back at the Lincoln Ranch, Kenny and Mary Faith made plans for the next season. The new year came and passed. On a January evening, Kenny went to bed and never woke up. He died of an apparent heart attack at age 56. Of her husband and best friend, Mary Faith wrote, "He could do anything and do it right." There was so much snow at the Lincoln Cemetery that friends Dave Harrington and Mike Barthmas hooked up a team of white mules and put the casket on a sleigh with pine boughs in order to get to the cemetery. Mary Faith rode the mile from the church to the cemetery with Kenny in the sleigh. Of that day, she recalled 3 things in her memoir: that it was a little below zero, that she cried, and that she forgot to thank Noel and Brett Anderson for plowing the road. So if Noel and Brett are listening, Mary Faith thanks you. The death of Kenny was a surprise to everyone, especially Mary Faith, who now had to decide what to do with their ranch and outfitting business. To make matters worse, the winter had been especially brutal on their livestock. It had been one of the coldest on record, with sustained temperatures of 52 below zero for several weeks. Half of their livestock didn't make it that winter. Mary Faith and Kenny had been together for 37 years, raising a family and wrangling horses and clients, but now it was her call. By the spring, she had made up her mind. K-Lazy 3 Outfitters and Guides would continue. As I read between the lines, I think Mary Faith wanted to do it right by Kenny, and that meant outfitting. And I know that she wanted to keep outfitting herself. Like dust to the trail, she was drawn to her horses, the mountains, and the clients who called her friend. So for 10 more years, 10 more seasons, K-Lazy 3 Outfitters and Guides operated in the Bob Marshall and Scapegoat. Jeff, Mary Faith's son, became a partner in the business, and together they, as Mary Faith wrote, washed saddle blankets, oiled saddles, and wrangled horses. Her daughters Jackie, Jerry, Judy, and Penny Jo also contribute to the business as cooks and packers and help with just about everything you can imagine. And it's a privilege to have several of Mary Faith's children here with us today. And a little later, I'll let them tell you all stories that they remember. In 1998, after 34 years of outfitting, Mary Faith sold the business and retired. But she didn't hang up her boots. After a lifetime of making friends, she decided to cash in on some of those, hey, you should come visit me, and you fill in the blank. She bought what she called a real cowgirl outfit, a Dodge half-ton pickup and a 4-horse trailer. She also bought a new canvas tent just for the hell of it. When asked why, she replied, why? I'm not sure. I guess I missed my tent in the mountains. She spent time in Grand Junction, Colorado, riding her horses and spending time with her friend Phyllis on top of the Grand Mesa National Forest, where they lived in an old line shack in the shade of quaking aspens. She wrote, not much cooking or cleaning up here. Up in the morning, coffee, pull on boots, catch a horse, and head out. Beautiful country with cows and no fences. In between trips, she visited her daughters and other family members. When her good friend and former client, Charlie Horsky, invited her to visit him and his wife in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, she decided to give Mexico a try. She wrote, what a wonderful time. It was strange, new country for a country girl like me. We walked on the beach and shopped, watched the cruise ships come into the harbor, beautiful sunrises and sunsets across the ocean. There were chickens nearby, and every morning those roosters were a-crowing. I loved it. She began spending winters riding with her cowgirl friends in Wickenburg, Arizona, where she boarded her horses at a corral called Horsepitality. In the summer, she was back at the Lincoln Ranch, helping friends with projects and spending time riding on her own in the Montana backcountry that she loved. The Forest Service honored her as a distinguished outfitter with a custom set of dishes and plates, and the Professional Wilderness Outfitters Association recognized her for her contributions to the outfitting industry in Montana. She proudly displayed the plates and plaques on her wall. When people talk of the famous Montana outfitters, the names Jack Hooker, Howard Copenhaver, Smoke Elser often come up, as they should. However, I would argue that Mary Faith Hoeffner should be on that list. As one of Montana's first women outfitters, she was a pioneer. She bucked, no pun intended, the stereotype that outfitting was solely a man's game and proved time and time again that a woman could guide and manage camp just as good as anybody. She had her fair share of trials and navigated them with an optimism we can all envy. I think Mary Faith always knew she could do whatever she set her mind to. I think she figured that out as an 8-year-old girl in Augusta, standing on top of Bucko with his glass high at full gallop. Over the years, she proved herself right time and time again. Mary Faith passed away on October 12, 2015, leaving a legacy for us to learn from and enjoy. A memorial to her and Kenny stands in Hooper Park in Lincoln and reads, in memory of Kenny and Mary Faith Hoeffner, Wilderness Outfitters, K. Lazy 3 Ranch of Lincoln. At her funeral, the church was filled to overflowing with outfitters, friends, and former clients. At the cemetery, her children had the horses ready. As the family rode out together, there was one horse without a rider. Her favorite buckskin badger wore Mary Faith's hat and saddle. Several hundred people gathered at Lincoln High School afterwards. They shook hands and sang campfire songs. Everyone had a story to tell. In conclusion, I'd like to share the last entry Mary Faith made in her memoir before she died. I think it sums things up pretty well. Outside across the meadow, the aspen are turning yellow. Here I am on the ranch with 3 horses I raised and trained. Rode up on the Elkhorn Mountains last week chasing cattle with my son Jeff and grandson Colin and 2 cowboys, David Clark and Jim Stein. We rode to the top of the mountain where I decided to sit in the sun and wait for the cows to come down the ridge. Sitting on the very top of the Elkhorn Mountains, just me and my horse and dog Toby. Life couldn't be any better, and it's not over yet. Thank you.